General tab. We're going to start this next series of tutorials and talk about the different audio settings you're going to need for Sonar. This becomes very important depending on the hardware you're using, because if you don't have it set up correctly, you're going to run into a lot of problems. The problems you could run into, for instance, are poor audio quality. You might have some latency. Now, latency you're going to spend a lot of time figuring out, because that's the delay that comes in your system inherently due to the drivers you're using. And what I mean by that is different programming code allow for different timing of your actual drivers. Real world application is that if you have a microphone and you're talking or recording or singing or whatever into Sonar, that if you're actually talking and then it gets recorded into a track and then played back through headphones or through a speaker, if there's too much of a delay, that makes it really hard to function, because you're hearing yourself and then you're hearing the actual delay much later. So that's the latency issue. The goal, of course, is always to have this be as short as possible so that there's a very little amount of delay so you can function in a real quick turnaround type situation. This also applies to playing keyboards or other synthesizers. From the minute you push a key to when the sound actually comes out of the speakers, that's going to be affected by the driver you're using as well. There's several different types of drivers, and we're going to explore which one's best and which are your options. Hopefully you're going to have some kind of proprietary unit, something you bought from a third-party manufacturer and you're not using your on-board sound audio hardware. And instead you'll have something that hooks up with USB or FireWire, or it's a PCI card inside your computer, something that's designed to be a professional piece of equipment, and it's going to come typically with some of its own drivers. Double check that it really works on Vista, if that's what you're using, or XP, and then it's not just Mac compatible, because there are some audio interfaces which don't work on Windows at all. So you're going to make sure that you have that all checked out before you buy one. So when you have it all hooked up, what we're going to do now is go into Options and go to Audio. We're going to look at these three tabs right here. These are the three important tabs for setting audio information. And we'll start with this one here, the General. And you can see we're using a driver called Audio for All. This is something I recommend using if you're just using your onboard audio equipment. This improves the quality often of your actual built-on audio interface by using drivers that are designed to be more universal. And you can get this as a download offline and add it into any system you're using. And you can see I'm using it here with my built-in audio hardware. So we have a couple options here: playback timing master and record timing master. So we can actually set these differently. This allows us to have one master clock for the sync of our digital audio. This is going to need to be set to something, and it's going to need to be set to whatever your interface you're using, because that's the master clock for all of that. There's really no good reason to have it set to anything else unless your interface has several different inputs and only one of them is receiving digital clock from an outside source. So you'll need to set that. Check the documentation with your interface for more information on this, but just make sure these are set. Typically, the default is set to the correct place. Now, you can sometimes change the bit depth. This is talking about resolution of your audio in terms of how many steps of amplitude and the whole digital signal. And right now, with this particular setting, it's grayed out, but if it's 24 as a default, that's one thing. It can sometimes be set to different things. We can also set 24-bit double precision engine, and this allows for Sonar to use 24-bit internal precision even if your audio hardware or system doesn't permit 24-bit anything. So this is a way to get better quality. It takes up more processing, so if you don't need it, I don't recommend using it. We can also set the stereo panning law. This determines if you have something panned in the center, what it does. So you have some options here: 0 dB center, so it's going to taper constant power; 3 dB down in the center, and then we have 0 with a different kind of taper, 3 dB down with a different kind of taper, -6 dB center linear taper, 0 dB center balance control. So a little bit confusing options here. You can probably leave this exactly how it is. However, if you're noticing when you pan things from left to right that sometimes as you do, the apparent level changes as you go, then you might want to experiment with some of these other options to see if you can't smooth it out. So if you pan from left to right, that the level stays constant. That becomes important. Now, dim solo gain, there's a dim button on your actual program out here in the console view, and this determines what that level is. If you hit the dim, does it take it down 6, 12, or 18? The default is 12. We can also set the sample rate for new projects. I would leave it at the default of whatever you're using most. In my case, 44.1 due to the hardware. But sometimes if you're doing picture or post-production, you might set this to 48 or high resolution as well. Now, mixing latency. This refers to the actual latency I was talking about before we got in here. And some interfaces let you use this here, which allows you to change the buffer size, and then it indicates how much time of delay there is. But in this case, the ASIO does it all by itself. So you actually have to go into the ASIO panel. Now the ASIO panel is going to show whichever control panel is associated with your particular ASIO drivers you're using. So in this case, it would show the ASIO for all, or it might show Pro Tools hardware if you're using Pro Tools interface. It might show Motu interface panel, etc. It's going to change depending on what hardware you have, so you need to look at the manual for whatever hardware you're using and explore from there. Once you make your changes, hit apply, and then OK. And then you can go on to whatever else you're doing. We're going to look at the Advanced tab next, so let's move on at this point.